Hi, my name is Barb Hartman. I'm the Health Services Coordinator for the Thompson School District. And the topic for this presentation is child abuse and child abuse reporting. These are two very important topics for anybody who works with children in the school setting. So let's get started. Okay, like we said, today's topic is child abuse. And in order to talk about child abuse, the first thing we need to know is what exactly is child abuse. Well, child abuse is defined as any non-accidental physical, sexual, or emotional injury caused by an act or omissions, okay, not doing something that a prudent parent would do, of an adult or another child. There are several types of child abuse. There's physical abuse, which I think we all pretty much understand what that is. There's also physical neglect, which is failure on the part of the child's caretaker to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, and supervision. This is kind of a gray area only because we would never want to accuse a family in need off the top of being abusive if really all they need is our help to connect to resources. Does that make sense? So we don't want to jump on that bandwagon if we haven't taken an opportunity, connected people with our homeless liaison, those kinds of things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Emotional maltreatment is belittling or rejecting a child and not providing a positive emotional atmosphere. And then sexual abuse, sexual exploitation of a child done for the sexual gratification of the offender or another person. Statistics, I would like to impress on everyone, how important our job is when it comes to recognizing and reporting child abuse. In Colorado in 2004, there were 46,000 reports of child abuse. Nationally, it is estimated that 1% of children are victims of child abuse, and that 3 children die every day from child abuse. So very, very important our role is with that. Some facts about sexual abuse. Experts estimate that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys have been sexually abused before turning 18 years of age. 67% of all reported sexual abuse occurs with a victim younger than 18. Okay, so certainly within the school district's population of kids. The median age for reported sexual abuse is actually 9, while 21% of victims of sexual abuse are younger than age 8. 1 in 10 child victims reports abuse. That means 90% don't report abuse. So if you ever hear something that is suspicious, we must act on that. We may be that child's only hope in a bad situation. 85 to 95% of child victims are sexually assaulted by someone they know very well. And 34% of the child victims are abused by family members. The other thing that's important to understand about the actual perpetrator of child abuse is that they look like everyone else. So we can't be fooled into thinking that we would somehow know one if we saw one. Okay? They're going to look like normal people. They often go out of their way to be trustworthy and gain access to kids, and school districts are places where kids are. Most offenders molest many times and have an average of 16 victims before they're caught. And more than 80% of sexual abuse happens on a one-on-one adult and child situation. So who's required to report abuse and neglect? Well, under state law, all school officials and employees are required to report known or suspected. I want to emphasize the suspected. You do not have to know for sure. If you have that kind of uneasy feeling about something a child says to you or something you observe, then you probably have already met the level of suspecting something. Okay, you should listen to your instincts. And like I said, it's known or suspected cases of child abuse or neglect or circumstances which might reasonably lead to abuse or neglect. And we know we encounter those situations at the front desk of our schools. If we have a parent or a relative or an adult just coming to pick up a student and they look to be impaired, this would be an example of a situation that could lead to abuse or neglect. You would not check a child out to somebody who's visibly impaired. So that's one example where you need to be thinking about what are these situations which might reasonably result in abuse or neglect. Any school official or employee who's reporting in good faith is immune from liability, both civil and criminal, according to state law. What does that mean? That means that the parent or the adult for which you made the report cannot come back to you and sue you for making the report, whether or not the report was found to be true or not. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it's ever substantiated or if they're ever charged with anything. You are immune, so you cannot be guilty of a crime if you report. However, if you do not report, there are several crimes that you can be guilty of. Okay, so this is very important for you to understand, because remember, you only need to suspect, number one. And any person who willfully violates the provisions can be prosecuted by the law. Conviction carries a maximum sentence of 6 months in jail, $750 fine, or both. And the district liability insurance does not cover criminal acts. So if you are charged with failure to report, they may cover you up front, but if you are found guilty, you will owe them all of your defense money back. And they will also not pay for punitive damages. Punitive damages are damages a court can reward in a case to punish an individual. So none of your insurances will cover it. It's meant to punish you for not following the law. So several very compelling reasons why you should definitely make a report if you suspect or know of child abuse or neglect. So what is a reasonable cause to know or suspect abuse or neglect? Okay, well, what that might look like is a child who exhibits bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, failure to thrive, burns, bone fractures. A subdural hematoma is a bleeding in the brain from a brain injury. Soft tissue swelling. Now, kids can get all of those things at any time. We know they're accident prone. All right, so definitely they're involved in activities where any child can have any of those things. What makes it to know or suspect child abuse is when those things are accompanied by these minor notes, such as a condition that's not justifiably explained. The student can't tell you how it happened. Now, that one can be tricky because first graders might give you 3 different stories in a day on how they got hurt or how they got that bruise. And that's completely normal. All right? So you really have to use some judgment, but if you get that feeling that something's not right, the child usually displays more than a happy story about how they got hurt. Does that make sense? If they have a nervous story about how they obtained an injury, now that's where we get that sort of sixth sense that something's not quite right. A history given is in variance with the condition. Like they tell you a circumstance that could not have resulted in the injury that they're displaying. Fingerprints, bruise patterns are not caused by running into a door. Okay, doors can't do that. When a child is subject to sexual assault or molestation, sexual exploitation, or prostitution, obviously those are known or suspected cases of abuse, neglect. Okay, others. When a child's parents or custodian fail to take the same action to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and supervision that a prudent parent would take. All right, so that's what we talked about. You know, is it always, how about the child who lives in a car? Okay, we've had that. All right? Did we call social services? We did. But we also worked with that family. Okay? You need to know that this cannot continue this way, right? Here are the resources. This is what we can connect you to. Let's get you into a better situation. Okay, when the child is subject to emotional abuse, and this one's tough because that can be a little hard to tease out, but emotional abuse means an identifiable or substantial impairment of the child's intellectual or psychological functioning and or development, or a subsequent risk of emotional abuse, related to this emotional abuse. And there are two situations that child abuse and neglect can appear in. One would be interfamilial abuse, or within the family abuse. So a family member, relative, is the perpetrator of the abuse. And this falls into the realm of social services. So when you're making a report related to a suspected perpetrator who's in the home, who's related to the child, then that report goes to social services. Third-party abuse or neglect is related to someone unrelated to the victim. And this report actually can go to law enforcement or social services. I usually make my report to social services because the district has a form, a set form, and it's not a blank statement. It gives you a chance to organize your thoughts, fill in the blanks. And if you call social services with a third-party assault report, they have to move it on to the appropriate law enforcement agency, which means that you don't have to spend a lot of time also trying to figure out which law enforcement agency to call in relation to your third-party assault. But you must get a guarantee from them that they are going to move that on to the right law enforcement person, and write that down on your report, that you made the report, they took the report, and they're moving it on to law enforcement. All right, or you can try calling law enforcement directly, but then they're just going to have you make a blank statement. All right, an act of a teacher or other school official or employee is considered child abuse if, all right, because remember, is there ever an incidents where you might report yourself? Possibly, but let me qualify that. Okay, so it's not child abuse if the act was performed in good faith and it's in compliance with the school district's codes, okay, as long as you're functioning within school district policy, codes, expected behavior, you're fine, you're protected. If the act was an appropriate expression of affection or emotional support, okay, you should also be fine. However, what if it's not? Okay, do kids ever push adults to their limits? Possibly. You have to question if you've ever taken an action against a child that involves you emotionally, that involves your emotions, then you may be building a case for someone to make a claim against you. To rise to the level of abuse, you would have to leave a mark on a child. And if you ask me if that's ever happened, I would say yes. It happens. It can happen. Okay. What the law is going to use to decide whether or not it reaches the level of abuse from you guys or from an employee is whether or not you follow district protocol. You cannot claim that you were performing some disciplinary act on a student if you're not the school building's disciplinarian. Does that make sense? If the high school has a dean of students who addresses discipline, but your claim is that your action was meant to discipline a child, then it's going to be difficult for you to justify your actions if your actions were indeed some form of discipline.